hold on, the real genius of training your breath is not to get better in terms of faster, but it's in terms of recover quicker. And that's what, for an athlete, what it really taps into is it improves your baseline breathing throughout the day. There are all the amazing health benefits, which regulates your nervous system better, which helps you to sleep better. And then in sport itself, it helps you to recover much quicker when you become aware of it and train it to a high level.
That was Leo Ryan, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by our longtime sponsor, SimplyFaster.com. There's 2 items I'd like to talk to you about today that you can find in Simply Faster's online store. Whether you're a coach or an athlete, these are both things that you'll find highly useful as tools in your training toolbox. The first is blood flow restriction training methods. And after hearing about blood flow restriction training for years now, as well as the results that athletes are getting with it, especially in, for example, lactate sports like swimming, 100-meter freestyle, and not only hearing of that, but also seeing how much some swimmers had liked that type of training method, I knew I had to start trying it out myself. So I've been utilizing the air bands. I really enjoy it, both the feeling while I'm actually training with them, as well as seeing the visual result of spending time training with the methods and then the strength result. They've been a really cool training tool, and I would definitely recommend checking into air bands. SimplyFaster.com also has Be Strong brand blood flow restriction. The second item is the VMAX Pro, and this is a new option for velocity-based training, barbell tracking. It provides valuable load-based data, including speed in all phases of a lift, and it delivers key metrics such as power, velocity, distance, as well as duration of effort. The VMAX Pro system measures any lift you can think of. It's portable, durable, and intuitive. You can check out these 2 items and much more at our sponsor, SimplyFaster.com's online store. Let's get on to the show. Welcome to another show. Great to have you here. Every year and even every month within the past year, I have gotten more and more into the concepts of the breath and breathing, and whether that's on the level of biomechanics and movement and how the breath expands portions of the ribs and allows us movement options from that inside to out perspective. And then also breathing on the level of just energy, recovery, the wellness and the health elements of proper breathing. And everything that goes with that, the breath just becomes more and more a part of my coaching life and my daily life. I'm really excited to bring back for the show today guest Leo Ryan. Leo previously was on episode 219, and he is the founder of InnateStrength.com. Leo is a performance coach and breathing specialist. He studied from many elite therapeutic and breathing schools, including the Buteyko Method, Wim Hof, Oxygen Advantage, and many others. And he is an absolute expert in so many elements of breathing and breath training. So last time on the show, Leo talked about running marathons with no actual run training, just the breath training. And he went into lots of elements of breath training for athletic performance. On the show today, Leo will return to dig into the role of breath training, largely this time for its role in recovery, both within the workout itself. So how can I recover faster from set to set or bout to bout? And then how that works out to day-to-day recovery. So maybe you're not even an endurance athlete. Maybe you just want to recover faster between strength and power sessions. So Leo's going to be giving a very detailed explanation on the role of breath, the mechanics of breath, and the recovery. He'll be talking about some elements of breathing and capacity building. So we talk about often building an aerobic base. So we talk about distances and volumes, but rarely do we get into the actual mechanics of the respiratory system. So Leo will be covering some mechanics of how he addresses breathing mechanics, physiology, and rhythms, and how he can use that to really expedite recovery times. He'll also be talking about CO2 or carbon dioxide tolerance, and its role in wellness and athletic function. And then we'll finish the show with some breathing dynamics within the scope of a strength training session. It's so enjoyable learning more about the breath, this thing that you do thousands of times each day, not just in workouts, but also throughout your daily life. And it's something that has the power to change athleticism and also branch out to elements of health and well-being. And it was so good to have Leo to chat about that today. So let's get to episode 323. Leo, awesome to have you back on the show, man. I did want to start with kind of just an interesting thought I had. Recently, Chris Korfist was on the show talking about female athletes that he has worked with, saying that those with a background in Irish dance were always amazing athletes. And of course, you are from Ireland, and I'm sure Irish dance is, of course, a lot more big of a deal where you're from. Maybe from the sounds of it, maybe even to a detriment for the escalation of athletes. But I'm just curious, what's your experience with that movement practice, and what is it like from the source of it all here?
Yeah, Irish dancing is a phenomenal. It is now a sport without a shadow of a doubt. I've got a 13-year-old girl that's involved in it, and I have a wife who's a former All-Ireland champion. And to see the progression even from back when she was doing it in, say, the 1990s, it would have been the 1990s was my wife, and now my daughter doing it. To give you an example of her training week, she will be expected to train in class 4 1.5-hour sessions a week of dance. She will be expected to do 2 hours at home 6 days a week.
Wow.
They, at 13 years of age, from the age of 10 at the elite level, which is, they have like level 5, they have 5 levels mainly. So you got like beginner, intermediate, advanced, and then you have pre-competition, and then you have the elite competition, just to translate it across for everybody. So at that elite level of it, you would then be, most of them will be looking at hiring personal trainers and even sports psychologists from the age of 10. That's how detailed they're beginning to get with it. And how competitive it is. But on the flip side of that is there's a huge amount of injuries. Like, I could tell, I know of girls, let's say of a group of 16 girls, I'd say there's at least 10 of them have broken bones and done ACL injuries in the last year and a half.
Wow.
At least. Yeah, so the training practices in terms of strength and conditioning and flexibility work isn't up to scratch from what I've seen so far, although it's starting to come in. But it's it's a hugely competitive sport. It's incredible.
I'm sure here where it's not as competitive, where it's like people just go, maybe they go to class like 4 times a week for an hour or something. You know, I was just thinking of the athleticism that comes out of that could be translated into other things.
Oh,
as well.
like even, well, you say it's not it mightn't be competitive. The US is huge for Irish dancing. Like at the World Championships every year, the World Championships are either held alternatively in Ireland or abroad. So they were in Montreal, for example, next year. They were in the US just before all the COVID lockdowns. And then they were back in Ireland there just this year. But I think you have 52 countries been represented at the World Championships. Like, it's a genuine World Championships. And the schools that are competitive are highly competitive. But if you think of what Irish dancing is, like, it's there's a lot of spring in a lot of footwork, a lot of high kicks in it, and a lot of fast feet in it. So for improving your footwork for sport and your speed for sport, it's absolutely incredible. In fact, I think I might have even seen on one of the New York pages, I think they had an NFL player in doing Irish dance as a means of improving his footwork. Yeah.
If there's a video of that anywhere, I want to put it in the show notes. So
I'll have to root it out for you.
I can imagine that, for the first 2 weeks of all football training, when strength and conditioning starts, they should all just do Irish dance for 2 weeks and then do everything else.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe in Notre Dame College it will fly that way.
Yeah. I know my Paul Cater, who's been on the show, coach out of California, he says that his first few weeks or months of training is basically dance class, and then it morphs into full-on S&C. So it's cool to think about the roots of the rhythm and things like that. I imagine the reactive strength index, if you put some of those girls on a jump mat and had them do like the bouncing tests, they would probably score extremely well, I'd imagine, compared to other athletes.
Yeah, hugely. I mean, that's what they're doing all day long, and it's for like 2 hours a day of just continuous footwork. And that's where they're really strong on it. Like, I'm doing a lot of work with, getting big toes in terms of rehabbing and restoring people, getting big toes moving, getting the foot moving, and then working up the kinetic chain. But those girls really don't need it at all. The only thing is that their feet are pretty mangled because they're feet inside some pretty tight shoes.
Ah, got it.
Their movement and strength in their feet are incredible.
Yeah, a lot of repetitive force going into small spaces. That could definitely, with the shoes, that could definitely make sense. interesting. Shoot, I'm excited if my daughter is interested in it. I'll try to get her in a class. It'll be fun to kind of watch that kind of athleticism come out, and maybe I'll get some ideas myself. So, it's I had no idea it was that big in the United States as well. I was totally oblivious to that.
Oh, huge! A lot of world champions come from the US every year at the different age categories.
Yeah. Well, cool I'll have to, scan the show notes. Hopefully there's something with, if there's a football player doing it, definitely posting it. So, but anyways, one of the themes that I really wanted to get to in this podcast, and I'll just share my story because I guess, I think it would be a good segue. And I think it's early on in a lot of people's, not everyone's, but a lot of people's training careers, it's like it starts with muscles and more, force-based principles and biomechanics and all those things. And you hear about breath. But it's never, a lot of times it's kind of like a side thought, like, all right, we should do some breathing over here on the side every now and then, or this or that. And as I've kind of gone along, there's been two areas that have really been impactful for me in how I think of it. One has been, I guess you could call it, I don't like to use the corrective exercise space, but basically just using the breath to expand different parts of the ribs and thorax and torso and to change the body's function from the inside out. The second that's really been powerful for me, I mean, they both have, but has been breathing as a recovery tool. And when I was 35, I'm going to be 39 in a month here. But at 35, my nervous system just, whatever you want to call it, physiology just crashed. Like
you're not 20 anymore.
No, I'm not 20 anymore. But it was so interesting because I was always thinking, like, why? Like, I mean, it makes sense. Like, I've been training my butt off since I was basically 13 without taking too much of a break. And then kind of living more of a high output kind of lifestyle, having a family and 2 young kids. And I just finished a big book project, Speed Strength. It took me 3 years, and I finished that when I was 34, 35. So it was almost like the culmination.
Congratulations, man.
Thanks. Yeah, it was a lot. And then
that's a big project.
I just remember, but at age 35, though, right before it crashed, I was doing really well. Like, I mean, I was dunking a basketball well, a lot of athletic output, sprint speed was pretty good. And then it just crashed. And I remember I just couldn't, the workouts I could normally recover, I'd be walking in the gym the next day and just be garbage. Like, my jumps would be horrible. Like, everything was flatlining. And then anyways, kind of working on different things to kind of get that back, think about what was down and how to restore it. Obviously it'd be nice to just, I guess, be 20 and sitting on a beach somewhere. That'd probably be a real nice way. But one of the things was just recently, honestly, 2 months ago, was doing morning breath work. And I've done Wim Hof in the past and things and I felt like it was useful, but this was the one I've been doing. Was basically kind of like a Wim Hof mixed with some box breathing, some exhales, some recovery breaths, a little more dynamic, probably a little more parasympathetic. And I seriously, like, my strength and energy, like, almost instantly, like, just like that, I went from being able to do only like 2 high intensity workouts a week to 4, literally in the scope of almost a week or 2. And then a lot of my outputs, my strength, everything has just been steadily improving since then. So I'm thinking, like, all right. And I also just read the book Breath by James Nestor. And
great book.
Oh, so much. Book. Yeah, so much good. So that's my segue. Obviously, I think that someone who's already got a high vitality, in their 20s, might not be the same as someone who's in their 30s. But I think regardless, these principles are helpful for everybody. So with that story out of the way, I'll just ask you, what's your take on, like, breath and then recovery? And I know we touched on it last time, but I'd like to get into that more, like the nervous system, the physiology, the ability to recover from training, life, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
Thoughts on that?
Well, maybe even just before that, I just want to touch on your story because most of my clients are people exactly like you. Okay. They get into they're usually actually early 30s. And they're breaking down. They're just all of a sudden, either they lose their energy and they're like, what is going on with me? Or they start getting injured much more frequently and none of their usual strategies have worked, even if they're high level people and have pretty good strategies in place. Women, usually it's men towards their 40s and ladies early 30s, and it's just incredible to see. I think it's, for me, standing back, I didn't mean it and intend for it that way, but that's just the people that come train with me and come practice with me a lot. And I think there's something about that time. I think Paul Chek said it beautifully, which is every summer has a winter. Mm-hmm. And if you don't take your winter, well, then eventually winter is going to come and take you. In other words, that you need, of course, there's periods during the year, there's periods during your day, like every day is a night, so you're going to have to rest well at night. And every summer has a winter, so there's periods during your year where you just have to back off. But During your 20s as a human, you can keep going through that and through that and through that and ignore it and ignore it and ignore it and go and go. But eventually, it might be a decade or 2 decades down the road, your being just goes, no, I'm out of here. I'm out. And I need some rest period here. And what I've found is I've just been very, very lucky is because I was sick as a kid, as I explained in the last podcast, and I found the breath very early in my life. So I tuned into my breath and my whole nervous system very, very early on. So the breath is a phenomenal window or mirror as to how your whole body and mind is working. It's phenomenal in that sense. And then you can use the breath to upregulate or downregulate the system as needed. So you can use specialized techniques to improve your baselines, if that makes sense. Maybe if I explain another way as well for people that might understand, if you listen to the Huberman Lab podcast at all, he has a couple of good episodes on dopamine and how dopamine works in the body. And dopamine is your neurotransmitter for want, for desire, for going out and going after things. It's the main molecule that makes you do that. Like from there comes adrenaline, and from there comes all your fight or flight hormones. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, but if you're a person, if you have baseline dopamine and then you start taking stuff to increase dopamine, let's say it's coffee, let's say it's drugs, let's say it's exercise to an excessive amount, doesn't matter what it is, anything that you desire or that has a slight addiction risk to it, let's put it that way, right? Every time you take it, sure, those dopamine levels go up and the wave goes up, but then it drops below baseline. So the way dopamine works is, first of all, it makes you go out and get the stuff. But then after a while, it merges and changes to, it starts to work when you don't have it. So coffee is a beautiful example of this, which is people start drinking coffee in the beginning because they love it, they love it, they love it, they love it. And then all of a sudden, after a year or two, they get to a stage where they can't do without it. They can't do it. Oh no, I need my cup of coffee. And the reason why that is because the way dopamine works in your system is you've now lowered your baselines of dopamine. And so every time you take coffee, you're actually just getting yourself back up to baseline, just to where you feel decent throughout the day. Now, I see this in sports people where they're training, and training begins as a really good positive thing. And they're training, then they're going at it for a decade, and then they get to elite level sports where it might be even 2 decades of it, and they're pushing boundaries. But all of a sudden, exercise turns into this, I don't feel good anymore, and I need to do it just to feel normal, just to feel satisfied again. And at the same time, you lose a sense of what normal is. And eventually, the body and mind just break down in one way or another. Either you just crash and burn and you burn out altogether, or you just lose your energy and you're not performing to where you once were. And what I've just found is that the breath is a beautiful guide as to rebuilding your baselines and then getting a sense of where you are in the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I will say the one thing I remember that you talked about last time that I've kept with me, and especially since I've been doing my breathing in the morning, is using a breath hold as a rudimentary, that's not maybe not the right word, but basically a rough HRV. Like you can use it as an organic HRV. Maybe that's a better, or
natural way. Exactly. That's a beautiful way of putting it. Actually, never thought of it like that. I actually find it more sensitive than HRV.
Really? Yeah. My mind was trying to search for a few different words. Oh, that would be good there. But I noticed the days that, because it's my training has been interesting lately. It's been a lot more. When I was in my early 30s, a lot of times, honestly, I wasn't excited to train. I felt like I had to. And then I'd get going, and I mean, like you said too, with the dopamine, like I discovered coffee when I was 27, just blasted pre-workouts basically as well. That feeling for till I was about 32, 33, I got off of that. So when I was 35, I was off of it. But I think by then, all that had been. It was just this massive train that eventually needed to, like you said, every up has its down. So these decades of ups had to find a little bit of a down there, or a lot of a down. And that was it's funny, like sprint coach Charlie Francis, who a lot of people are familiar with, he said something back in the day that I always thought was interesting. I was like, how do you know this? You know, like the more you work with athletes over long periods of time, you start to feel and figure it out. He had said if you train hard for 7 years, athletes need to take a year where they do less, like lower volume, something is diminished. Otherwise, they're going to have a hard time continuing to progress. And I also find it interesting that like the sevens, like they say your life works in sevens. Sometimes there's looking to the numerical and the philosophy behind it. I find that interesting, you know, and I think a lot of athletes, especially in the pro realms, it's like, you have sponsorships, you have appearances, and there's pressure, and you've been doing this forever. It's so easy to run into that ground. Sometimes it just works itself out probably organically. Maybe you got hurt. Maybe you just decided to take a break or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I ran probably two 7-year, actually probably 3 7-year periods in a row where I did not really take a break. I took 1 3-month break pretty much, and just to play a bunch of disc golf, frisbee golf, and you know, do that, and that was nice coming back from that one. But anyways, yeah, I was.
When you asked me then about, you know, and this is the beautiful thing about breathing is that it does work more on the recovery side, without a shadow of a doubt. That's from what I've seen. And let me give you an example. A couple of years ago, I was trying to understand how breathing works. In fact, I was trying to promote breath training. So my idea of breath training is restoring your breathing system, your respiratory system back to baseline. Okay, that's the whole point of it. So it's a Buteyko and Oxygen Advantage style of breathing, but it's with a goal of restoring your baselines. But it's a type of training that, I mean, the Wim Hof style, you feel amazing from straight away because it's an excitation type of breath, right? Like it gets your whole system upregulated, so you feel amazing from it. Whereas the Oxygen Advantage side of things is you don't feel like that afterwards at all. So it's very hard for athletes to get it and to get the benefits of it. So we're trying to think of ways of convincing people to get through the kind of hard period of training to see the benefits of it. So I said, you know what, I'm going to run a 10-day program. And I was thinking of the old school movie Days of Thunder with Tom Cruise. I don't know, you're 35, you may or may not remember that.
I don't.
Top Gun-esque. It was around the original Top Gun time, right? And there was a scene in that movie where Tom Cruise is this young hotshot race car driver. Unbelievable guy that's come in, but he's burning out the car and the tires every single time he races. So he ends up not finishing any race. So the mechanic is there, who's Robert Duvall, and he's sitting him down and saying, look, we're going to have to do something about this. And Tom Cruise wouldn't listen to the mechanic in terms of how we raced. He goes, I'll tell you what, you're going to run 50 laps your way, and we're going to time you and see what the condition of the tires are like afterwards. And we're going to run 50 laps my way and see what the timing and the condition of the tires are like afterwards. So anyway, he goes in it and he runs the laps, and he comes back, and there's a scene afterwards where when he runs it, Tom Cruise's way, the tires are completely burned out and they're in absolute bits. Whereas when you look at it the mechanic's way, Robert Duvall's way, the tires were perfect, like brand new looking tires, and he ran it in a slightly faster way as well. That convinced him in the movie. It convinced Tom Cruise to listen to the old mechanic and actually race with him instead of just doing it his way, right? So I took that idea to breathing, and I said, okay, I'm going to take a simple test. I'm going to do a 12-minute run, old school. You can run it, you can cycle it, you can row it. You can take any endurance-based aerobic base activity. But you got to go, you're going to run it as hard as you can and get as far as you can. So it's about distance, okay? And then all I want you to do is to time your recovery. And your recovery is from the second that 12 minutes is up, you're going to hit start on a stopwatch, and you're going to slow your breathing down until you can breathe calmly in and out of your nose. That was it. So there was 2 parts of the test. One was what's your distance, and 2 was what's your recovery, what's your time to recovery. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there was about 50 people had run through this, what I call the Breathing Fitness Challenge. 50 people had run through it. And the most interesting thing I found from it was they ran it their way first, Then they trained for 10 days in breath holding and nasal breathing techniques, which is what I call breath training, okay? And then they ran it again after the 10 days, okay? But they ran it my way. What I found was a 1 to 2% performance improvement. But I found a 40% recovery improvement.
Wow.
40. So that's when I realized, hold on, the real genius of training your breath is not to get better in terms of faster, but it's in terms of recover quicker. And that's what, for an athlete, what it really taps into is it improves your baseline breathing throughout the day. There are all the amazing health benefits, which regulates your nervous system better, which helps you to sleep better. And then in sport itself, it helps you to recover much quicker when you become aware of it and train it to a high level.
So would you say that on the micro? Like I look at like the micro is the macro, as above, so below goes the saying. So if I could do an intense workout and then get back into nose breathing, calm pretty quick, that would also be a window into I'm probably going to recover and feel better the next day too. Would you agree with that?
Bingo. Like if you remember from our last podcast, I ran the Dublin Marathon back in 2017, nasal breathing only, no endurance training, no running for the last 7 years. And within 3 days, I was fully recovered and restored to where I was competing in judo the following week at a national level.
Yeah, that's awesome.
The beauty, it will help the macro as well as the micro. It'll help you to, like, sleep is one of the, people think that sleep, they how do I sleep better? The way you sleep better is you breathe better throughout the day. Yeah. That is your number one thing. And then you start addressing sleep at night. That I've seen a difference in people.
Yeah, I had heard Mark Wetzel, who was on the show, chiropractor, maybe a year or two ago, I was talking to him about my nervous system. I just call it nervous system because it's the explosive stuff that was killing me. I actually did a Spartan race at age 36, 37, did pretty darn good at it. I was like, I don't want endurance to be my thing. I mean, I could do it. Like I'm good at it, but I love sprinting and throwing things far and jumping high, and lifting heavy weights. But I mean, I don't know. It's maybe someday, maybe there'll be a season every year where I do a few of those. But it was more the explosive stuff. I just had a hard time. But even still, it's still, if I've learned anything, or at least my intuition has got me to anything, it's not just your nervous system. It is your whole physiology that works together to recover you. And it's not just, I think we say, oh, you're training the nervous system and here you're heroic, but they're more related, I believe, than that. There's more aspects of your physiology that go into the nervous system recovery.
Absolutely. I mean, even if you consider it, like everything inside, I think of the human body as a process. You have inputs, you have throughputs, and you have outputs. We are obsessed with analyzing the throughputs. In other words, what's going on inside, what's happening with our HRV, with our heart rate, what's happening with our organs, what's happening in our blood, what's happening in our muscles. But essentially, we can't change any of that stuff. Like you can't directly change any of that stuff. It's indirect. And the way you change it is through your inputs. Your inputs is how you live your life. What exercise do you do? How well do you breathe? Do you get outside? Do you expose yourself to cold and hot temperatures? What is your overall lifestyle like? And I think that even though we've become highly specialized in certain areas and amazing, I think we're overriding our physical capacities with how intelligent we are. And I actually think that as a human race, we're potentially weaker than we've ever been.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about weaker as in, we're, somebody set the world deadlift record last year, so, we're a stronger race. I mean, physically weaker as a whole human being, because we're not training certain portions that used to just be built in because we're farmers, we were hunter-gatherers, we were physical throughout our whole day. And I think that the intelligence of our modern lifestyle is actually hurting us physically a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I forget if I mentioned this already when we started recording, but the difference when I work inside and outside, either in direct sunlight or indirect, in terms of my energy, is just insane. Like if I'm inside, I could have I'm down to espressos now, a few espressos rather than pounding coffee. It's like my compromise. But I will need either so much more coffee or want to feel like I need to take a nap if I'm inside, if I don't get morning sunlight, if I don't have get my feet on the ground and do some movement. It's really a substantial difference. And it is, speaking of Paul Chek, like the guy's 60 and is still in insane shape, and I don't think he really drinks coffee. Like, he might have an espresso every now and then, and does, as you mentioned, the cold and the breath. And I was going to ask you even about, like, the ideas of, like, working in even within, like, strength training. Maybe we'll get to that. But I do so I do want to keep. Go ahead. Yeah.
And even more so, like, these are all now people are, and elite athletes are becoming aware of the benefits of, at least they're becoming aware of the breath and becoming aware of cold exposure and heat training and stuff like that. What about community?
Yeah.
What about diversity of activities in life, whether it's, family and sharing with other humans? What about outside of sport? What about music and art? And I'm not saying you have to be a musician, an artist, and a sport and an athlete, but I'm saying that the human, I think the human capacity is much broader than we think. And if we narrow ourselves down too much to us, well, I'm Leo and I'm just an athlete, well, then I'm on a road to mental health issues because I'm too narrow in my focus. The same way as if an athlete just does their sport and doesn't look after all their broader rehab and recovery side of things, eventually they'll get injured. Well, if a human being doesn't think broader than just their career and their sport and don't have other things built on, then it can very much affect them in a mental health capacity too.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I'm not an economist by any means, but I've heard that, like, when there's more specialists in society, the society is more, at least monetarily, air quotes, wealthy. There's advantages to that, clearly, but it's almost, there is an element where you can get more poor too, because the more you become a specialist and identify with that, versus I was at Rafe Kelly's Return to the Source retreat, which is like a living in nature, kind of off the grid parkour retreat where you're out doing like activities in community, challenging activities in nature, and then you come back and you're doing like singing by the fire, or you're in a sauna, like a Finnish sauna with a bunch of people singing, and it's just like, it's amazing. And you're not a specialist, it's just there's a more of a community feel. So it's like, how do we blend the benefits of where society has gone with the ability to specialize, but also bringing it back to that community level where you just where you can be not a specialist for a little while, and that's like that pure recovery. That's so good for you. So yeah, I think there's an interesting balance with things.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So I got like three things in my head here. So I got one. I wanted to close out just like the recovery piece, and then I wanted to get into your your experiment with the recovery times, and then some of your techniques. I know we touched on them last time. Just want to get into that again, but just kind of closing out the recovery. I know with me, and maybe in general, it's like, well, I guess the big thing is really how you breathe throughout the day, right? More than like, let's say I did a 10-minute thing in the morning. That's great, but I'd imagine the bigger impact that's going to really hit my physiology in a great way is probably more how that sticks with me. Would you say that's true throughout the day than it is just
Absolutely.
That 10-minute hit? Okay.
Absolutely. And you shouldn't have to think about it. It should be just innate. It should be built into you through your training, through a period of practice. Then you should be able to let go and not need it anymore. Does that make sense? But how should your breath look, for want of a better purpose, when you're in tune with it? I think is what you're asking, which is it's all nasal. So it's in through the nose and out of the nose. When you're at rest or in any low level activity, you should be nasal breathing. Now, I know people are going to come on, oh, I have adenoids, oh, I have hay fever. That's because your respiratory system isn't built strong enough yet. Oh, I have, but they might also say, but I have a broken nose. That's okay too. It can still be trained that you have calm nasal breathing and rest. And in the rare case, you may need an operation to fix the structure of the nose. That's in a very, very rare case. Not only should you be able to breathe in and out of your nose, but it should be subtle. The Chinese have a great saying, which is, your neighbor can't hear you breathe, you can't hear yourself breathe, and you can hardly even feel the fine hairs in your nose move as you breathe. So your breath as you're there should be subtle, should be imperceptible, should be hardly even noticeable. And even if you take a breath or two now for the listeners and just see, how am I actually breathing in this moment? And it will be incredible the amount of people who say, oh yeah, I can hear myself breathe, or it is big, or I need large breaths or big gulps, or I can't nasal breathe. That's a system that needs to be built, that needs to be trained.
Quickly, I wanted to let you know about the chance to try out Performance Herbalism for only a few dollars shipping costs.
and get one of Lost Empire Herbs' flagship products, Pine Pollen, for free. Switching to an herbal emphasis in my supplementation has been a life-changing switch for me. Just as nature is by design balanced and sustainable, I believe that the more natural our diet and our supplementation is, the better. I love and use several Lost Empire Herbs products that boost not only my energy, but also my strength. These include Shilajit resin and the Phoenix formula. You can check those out by heading to lostempireherbs.com/justfly and grab 15% off. If you're on the fence about the power of herbalism, I have a great offer for you, which is that you can get free Pine Pollen. Pine Pollen is an herbal powerhouse that is a hormonal and energy booster packed with nutrition. It's actually part of the Phoenix formula, and you can get that for free along with the normal shipping fee at justflypinepollen.com. All right, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, for me, it's funny for me. I've always been a nose breather, and I think I do have a fairly calm, at least to my conscious awareness. The subconscious layers, I'm sure, in there. Fairly calm awareness. But I read a book called Super Wellness about 2 years ago. I'm trying to remember the name of who wrote it. But she had talked about just nose breathing to get energy, like instead of coffee, go outside and do some like working in or nose breathing to escalate your energy. And I remember even in doing 20 powerful breaths, my nose actually hurt. Like it was uncomfortable. I don't have a deviated septum or anything, but it just kind of hurt. And it was hard. It was hard. Honestly, for me, aggressive nose breathing was difficult. I could do aggressive mouth breathing if I'm doing a tough workout, but I don't know if there was something there, because when I overcame that hurdle, I felt like I was a lot better. Like I leveled up, if that makes sense. Like to be able to do 35 aggressive nose breaths and there's no discomfort. And I feel like my diaphragm was trained more, honestly. Those, I think, are the things that hopefully maybe stuck with me. And I'm a believer now. Like it's something I'm going to be doing pretty regularly. I mean, I guess once it's automatic, it's great, but I really enjoy it, and I'll definitely be doing forms of that for the rest of my life.
Absolutely. If you go from 0 to gear 5, it's gonna hurt. Yeah. That's like asking somebody who hasn't ran in a year to sprint to do repeat sprints for an hour. They're gonna hurt the next day. So it's the same even with breathing. Is your nose is gonna hurt if you go from 0 to that. And by the way, I'm coming from somebody whose anatomy is one of the worst. Like my teeth are all bunched up. I got narrow jawlines. I got narrow nasal passages. I got a narrow nose because as a kid, I was that sick with asthma that's how I developed. And even I can do it. So you're talking to somebody who isn't naturally when I say not naturally a nose breather, I spent my childhood as a mouth breather. So it can be done. And the more you do it, the roof of your mouth will begin to expand. There's research behind that. Your nasal passages will open. Your control of your nares will improve so that you can make it stick better too. It's just training.
Yeah, that's the thing that's really been so cool about this is the same way. I'm just so used to just training, movement patterns, like speed, muscle groups, and that. And it's like, well, this is something you're leveling up to that's going to help you a lot. And even as you were saying, I just think this is really cool. As you were talking about, it's like imperceptible that it's almost like you can't even tell necessarily the hairs are going in or out or inhaling or exhaling. And to me, that is such if we talk about the masculine and feminine sides, is we so associate training with just the gas pedal. But it's like that almost to recover, you have to let off the gas pedal. And to fully recover, it almost is full into that other side where it is this imperceptible softness that helps the body to fully replenish itself so you can go push that gas pedal down again. Versus, I think we tend to overly... I guess you could say just put too much that masculine emphasis and recovery sometimes. It's like, you're going to do it like this. I mean, I will say structured breathing has been really helpful for me, but I also appreciate that almost softness of the breath, that imperceptibility where it's like this, that sticks with you for recovery as well.
The structure will help you lead into that. Yeah. And that's what I found amazing about what I wouldn't have connected with is the yogic and the Eastern philosophies originally. But I found the Buteyko and Advantage methods where they had a structure on it, and it brought me into that idea of imperceptible breathing. It brought me into that idea of subtleness and of working in and of calmness of the mind. It's very hard, I think, for a Western mind to go from quantitative analysis to hitting goals to be highly driven into you just got to sit there and be of no mind. It's very hard to do that. Yeah. breath training as a practice will guide you down that path and take you there very, very clearly. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's probably like the simplest way, honestly, to experience that other side of things. Because even in the realm of like sport technique, I think a lot of people want to be they're like, show me this position my limbs should be in, but actual movement is it's more of an intuitive automatic feeling that you run in rhythms. And that's a hard way. A lot of people don't easily take to that type of being instructed, but you could start with the breath from that if you're talking about softer sides of things. I just feel like that's an easy way to start there. That's very natural and intuitive.
Yeah. And then as the more you get better at that, then honestly, your whole perception of life and how you think will change as well. It's amazing the play it has in the mind too, and how it opens up your mind to just a more lateral way of thinking, a more expanded way of thinking.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we were talking about the last show, like the way you breathe impacts your physiology, but also your emotions. Like a lot of times your mental state, mind. It's almost like, honestly, it makes me think about if I was going to instruct a group in, let's say, some run training and it was like, look, we're going to do this based a lot on movements and you're going to feel this. I'm not going to tell you where your hand or your arm should be, Maybe to start the session with some breath work as well, that they're noticing their breath first, and that would almost help to prime the pathways to, hey, I'm noticing the relationship between my hip and my shoulder, not just doing the position the coach told, things like that. I think it could be beneficial. Just my mind kind of running here.
Yeah.
So, okay, I did want to ask you, so the recovery elements, the breath throughout the day. So I wanted to ask you, I'm sure we talked about this last time, so feel free to go into this as much depth as you would like. But, again, it's always good to talk about nuts and bolts. And, if you can recover faster and then in a session day to day, it's just a good thing. So just rehash some of those principles of what is that training program? What's the training program that's getting these people to that level? Like what errors were they maybe making before in their breath, and what were you emphasizing through the course of that training?
Okay. The way I consider breath training is there's three elements or three main dimensions to it. There are your mechanics, there is CO2 tolerance, which is your physiology, and then there is breathing rhythms. So these are three aspects of breathing that need to be enhanced, that need to be optimized, so that you can then create that subtle breath. Okay. So the original way I learned would have been through the Buteyko and Advantage methods. And for those that don't know, Buteyko was technically actually a Ukrainian doctor, but known as a Russian doctor, way back in the 1950s, who developed a breathing methodology for health. And that was learned by a gentleman named Patrick McKeown over here in Ireland. He brought it back to Ireland in the early 2002. And I trained with him in about early 2004. I trained in that technique to rehab my asthma. So that focuses very much on balancing out carbon dioxide in the body, because what a lot of people don't realize is that when you overbreathe throughout the day, in other words, if you're mouth breathing, if you're big breathing, if you're fast breathing, that will lead to a sensitivity to a rise in CO2. In other words, if you start to big breathe a lot, then you're more likely to continue it. And the more you continue it, you drop into a vicious cycle of needing to continue it. The more you do it, the more you need to do it. But what you end up doing is becoming sensitive to CO2, and you need carbon dioxide to help oxygen get into your cell. You need CO2 to help cellular health. But you don't get that because you're in this vicious cycle of getting rid of it without even realizing it. So the whole point of that method is to rebalance your physiology. And they do it through breath holding techniques and calm breathing as well. When I was doing that and working with people with that, I found that they weren't progressing very fast. That, I was spending 6 months doing stuff that later on I could do in a session or two. And that's when I found breathing mechanics work. So coming from physiotherapy, osteopathy, movement practice, and I found the idea of restoring the diaphragm, restoring the intercostals and the muscles of the chest, and restoring the exhale to be let go was really, really important. So that's the second part of breath training. So you got the physiology as part one, part two now is the mechanics. By mechanics, I mean, can you use is your diaphragm supple and can you use it well? Can you use your mid to upper chest well and breathe well? And can you let go of your exhale? In other words, does it spring out of your inhale? And you can view that through video analysis of the breath. So if you have somebody lying on their back with their knees bent and they breathe in, does their belly rise? Does their lower ribs expand? Does their chest, their mid-chest where your logo would be, does that expand? Because some people's don't. Mm-hmm. And can they let go of their exhale, or is their exhale held? So in other words, is it or are they contracting the muscles of the neck and of the lips and the tongue to control their exhale? If any of those three aspects are not optimized, then the physiology will also be off and their whole breath will be off. Mm. The last part then is the breathing rhythms. And I use rhythmical breathing techniques like Wim Hof, or, there's other ones out there like holotropic, and there's rebirthing and radiance, and there's a whole host on that side of things. And what they're all about doing is they're actually excitation breaths, but they really help you deal with your emotions and with your traumas of the past very directly. Whereas you will get there doing the breath holding, don't get me wrong, you will eventually deal with that stuff subtly as you restore with the physiology and with the breathing mechanics. But then the likes of the Wim Hof and the rhythmical breathing techniques are very, very powerful techniques for feeling emotions. So here are the three aspects that I look to build in people so that they restore their whole breathing system.
Got it. So it's just a little summary. So it's mechanical, so you make sure ribs expand, diaphragm's working, chest. And I know Katie St. Clair has been on the show with I mentioned all the way at the beginning, the biomechanics and the breath inside out. Like a lot of people overly belly breathe. They don't it's like they're almost taught to belly breathe, and then that chest doesn't expand at all. So that's been something I've been thinking about lately. But
the only thing, I don't know Katie St. Clair at all. I've seen her on Instagram, and a lot of people like the work that she does, and I think it's brilliant work. The one thing I would say is that your goal in doing all this is that you don't have to think about it.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So once you've trained it, you shouldn't have to, like, people are like, oh, you don't, there's a big movement out there now is you shouldn't be belly breathing. You should be laterally breathing into it. I think personally, I just think that's rubbish too. I think that it's just semantics and words. I think that you should be able, depending on the position of your body relative to gravity, your belly should rise when you breathe, without a doubt. Other than that, you're just getting into the very semantics of how it actually moves versus how it looks like when it moves. So I still think the value of belly breathing is important. It's there.
Yeah, I think it was more the belly breathing only was like the thing not to do. Like don't only belly breathe, but you should also. Yeah.
And she's dead right in that. And you have to be able to, she'll talk a lot about breathing into the back of your ribs as a means of building out thoracic movement and rib cage movement. And I think all of that is fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes the more I've been listening to that stuff too, I'll think like, man, I don't expand like back here at all. And I get the idea of being like automatic as well. I think that anything you can over intellect, especially if you're really cerebral, and you can over intellectualize anything.
Yeah.
So it's position and then the rhythm. Sorry, position and then the rhythm, and then I forget the
So there's a position, there's a physiology, which is balancing carbon dioxide in the blood, and your sensitivity to CO2, and then the rhythms is the third one.
Got it.
There's three parts. There's the mechanics, there's a physiology, and then there's the rhythms.
Got it. So I'll skip ahead a little bit because I had this question for you, but I've talked to coaches who do like running, and they'll talk about there's like a rhythm of the breath with the movement. Do you do anything like that where there's a movement, like any cyclic activity, and the breath is synced up into that in any sort of way?
Yeah, the first person I looked at that did that was Dr. John Douillard back in the late 80s and early 90s. He's a great book called Body, Mind and Sport. He brought my awareness to that. think of it, the best way to think of that is like a swimmer. So swimmers are taught to swim bilaterally, because if they swim and breathe unilaterally off one side on the front crawl, well, then they're going to develop overuse injuries through the neck, through the shoulder, through the spine as well, and into the hips, right? Because they're constantly turning to one side and overdeveloping one side versus another. Well, Douillard brought about that. He took that concept and applied it to runners. And he felt that if you exhale, so if your breath patterns stayed on a unilateral side, in other words, if let's say you exhaled every time your left foot hit the floor, that you would end up overdeveloping the left side of your kinetic chain versus the right, and you would develop repetitive use injuries on that side. So what he had his athletes doing was, first of all, learning how to breathe off. So let's say exhale off alternate foot patterns. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was the first part of that, which I brought in. And actually, do you know what? It's nice to play with and to change. The second part that he brought in, which I thought was ingenious, was, and you asked me about a little bit, was, can you extend the exhale? And it's a great way how to bring in calm breathing rhythms is, instead of running and let's say a 3-2, which is, in other words, or an exhale every third footstep, you can then extend it to an exhale every fifth, every seventh, every ninth footstep. Yeah. So in that way, you can train yourself to breathe more calmly, which means deal with CO2, deal with metabolic waste better, and keep the mechanics of your running gait better as well at the same time.
Yeah, I like that.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, because that was a question. That was like one of the main ones. I'd read The Breath by James Nestor, and he was talking about, yes, in swimming, obviously. And that's where I think I've had the honor of being able to work with swimmers, high-level swimmers for a while, and their work capacity was just crazy on the land. Like if you're going to do a circuit with them on the land, it was really, really good. And I think a lot of that is the just the breath-holding nature, the carbon dioxide tolerance nature of their sport. And then around
it's built into it by the fact that they might do 7 strokes without taking a breath.
Yeah.
Like I know some protocols extend that out. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, 7. Yeah, take a breath on. Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, but then it's a constraint that makes it happen naturally. But you have to actually think about it if you were on the land. And someone around the same time was saying like doing like bear crawling with like breath holds or something was like increase your capacity really quickly. I was just screwing around the other day. I was doing bear crawls on the football field, and so every 5 yards I would hold. Like go 5 yards, hold 5. It is rad. I was like, man, this is it's one of those things where you can improve your whole physiology without having to do more mechanical work. Like
yes,
I could crawl for 400 meters, or I could get the same physiological boost by maybe just doing 200 or 150, but I'm really pressing the breath and the rhythm of the breath. And anyways, I love that example.
Part of why that is, or at least the way I would think of that, is because, okay, CO2 is the only gas that crosses the blood-brain barrier. It is inextricably linked with fear in the brain. Okay, so fear, panic, anxiety are linked physiologically with a rise in carbon dioxide. Okay, so if you have more inputs to your nervous system, you're going to challenge fear anyway. You're going to challenge your whole body anyway. So now that you place your hands on the floor as well as your feet on the floor, and you're using whole body movement, your brain is getting much more inputs. And then you add a breath hold on top of it as well. You're conditioning yourself. There's a physiological component to it, which you're absolutely right. And there's a mental component to it as well, which is just as powerful, which is staying calm in a breath hold, and which also translates across the sport as well.
Yeah, I will say, like, in working with swimmers, like, not that I was definitely not this like super conditioning guy in the gym, but if you were going to be doing hard conditioning workouts in the gym and you asked a swimmer to do it, like, they were the most fearless. Like the ones, at least, who are a lot of the ones who are on that upper level, like, they were so fearless. They would literally do anything, and they would just like put their soul into it. And I think, part of that's, I think, who they were, their upbringing, their mentality, but then I think part of it as well, they're just used to being challenged to level up on the breath holding component all the time. And that, it's like, if I can do that, I can definitely do this, that mentality.
That's a basic thing. You want to stay alive. And the only reason why you hold your breath in nature is because you're being suffocated or you're drowning. Like that's the only reason really why you'd hold. That's why you'd hold your breath, unless it's a big fear response, right? So if you're training that as a part of your everyday training, you're training yourself psychologically to be so much stronger and more resilient in that sense.
Yeah, for sure. I just thought that was so interesting because in the breath book they were talking about where you get hooked up to like I don't know if it's a bubble over your head or something where you're basically going to breathe this higher carbon dioxide mix for 30 seconds or 2 minutes, and your brain is going to think you're you're choking or something, and then you just freak out. Even though it's not that bad, that you just still get oxygen. It's interesting the brain's physiology in response to that.
So our normal CO2 levels are between 5 and 7% in the blood. And what they did in that research, that was Dr. Justin Feinstein, he was working with somebody who had their amygdala, they had a disease and the amygdala didn't develop well. And so they had no fear response to any other fear stressor, right? And he brought her into the lab and put a gas mask on her and infused her with 35% CO2. And within the first breath, she was ripping it off, having a panic attack for the first time in her life. But he actually brought out a model this year, only in May of this year, called the Apnea-Induced Anxiety Model, AIA, the Apnea-Induced Anxiety Model, which looked at over 30 years of work in his field and also in other fields. And he combined it together to create this model, this hypothesis that when people, it's a physiological component to anxiety. So when people are in a stressful environment, that they hold their breath. So for example, there's no email apnea from corporate athletes, working on the email they hold their breath. And then after a while, like they generally forget to breathe. And this is induced by all different stressors, right? But when you hold your breath, your brain doesn't register that it's a breath hold. So it's like, okay, it's fine. And it can do that for up to a minute is what they found. And then the CO2 builds up so high that all of a sudden it's like level 4, nuclear bomb imminent. It's implosion rather than anything else. And your brain sets on red alert. It registers that there's a huge amount of CO2 in the system. And then it freaks out. And then you go into a hyperventilation and into an anxiety state. Nuts. That's the psychological component of breath holding, subconscious breath holding, where it's just as opposed to training yourself to get used to it and improve your resilience to it.
I just had a little smile on my face. I was thinking about, I think it's interesting, corporate athlete, right? Like there's the mental and the breathing elements of it, but it, there's an app for everything, right? Or like a digital thing for everything. I was thinking it'd be funny if there was like a light on top of the computer and it just said breathe every like 5 seconds or something. It said don't forget, like stop holding your breath, or I don't know. It'd be kind of funny. But I bet you, honestly, sadly, that would probably make a big difference. I mean, not sadly. I mean, it probably would be very helpful. But I just think it's interesting. I guess it's more of that's what we've come to, sadly, like level. I mean, it's just part of life, but it's also interesting where. Yeah, I mean, I feel myself doing it all the time. Even as you're talking, I was like, oh man, maybe I need that light. Like I probably do it all the time. And so anyways.
And when that happens, that's what sleep apnea is because your body's so dysregulated, is that during your sleep, you're even holding your breath. And if that happens, oh my God, like the negative consequences on your entire body is huge, from mental health to type 2 diabetes to increased risks of cancers and cardiovascular disease, and it's like the floodgates are opened at that stage.
Yeah.
So it's breath holding is an amazing training tool to build resilience. But then if it's a rhythm that you're doing throughout the day that you weren't aware of before, that's something that you want to restore, and so that you just breathe normally when you're stressed.
Yeah. Leo, do you know any more about, I know you mentioned like the breathe on it was the exhale on the 7th step, exhale on the 9th.
Yes. Yes.
And that too, that odd number helps you to flip the feet, right? Like, so it's.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
So the way I train that, that takes a little bit of entrainment. So the way I start that with people is I'll say, okay, exhale every time your left foot touches the floor, and slap your left leg. So in other words, it will be like, Every time it hits the floor, I'll slap my thigh to get it in my brain. Oh yeah, that's when I need to exhale. And then over time, you will build that where you don't have to slap your leg, and then you'll ingrain that into your running mechanics. Yeah.
Got it. I was just thinking in the book Breath by James Nestor, it was talking about I don't remember if it was talking about swimming particularly. I mean, swimming is an obvious one there, but it was talking about running, and it was like some like really hardcore running coach who was like taking that long exhalation, like run training thing to the extreme. Where and there was like a Finnish story of a Finnish runner as well that was just like, and this is endurance events, but long, just painfully long exhales, just sipping air. I know James himself and that Olsen character in the book where they were doing these runs together in, I think, Golden Gate Park, where they were just little sips on the inhale, and otherwise it was just all exhales. And it's, I mean, but to me, I mean, I'm a little ADD, so I like thinking about different things when I'm running. So like something else to focus on, keep me in the moment. And how powerful that was. They were talking about how effective that was for endurance training.
Olsen is a Buteyko instructor, as far as I know. And I have his book as well. It's a great book. He teaches the Buteyko Method, which is part of what I do as well, and what Patrick McKeown does too in the Oxygen Advantage. It all comes from the same, and this is his flavor of it, or this is how he was coaching it. I like that idea. I think of it like when you're a deep sea diver, like you want to sink to the bottom, and you want to be able to just sink at the bottom of the ocean and play around down there. So that's how I think of that when he's exhaling and taking little sips of air. It's really, really tough to do that. Yeah, that's one way of training yourself, because you're creating metabolic waste, you're creating heat, you're creating carbon dioxide, and if you're pushing yourself, you're creating lactic acid. And at the same time, you're teaching your body to breathe really, really calmly and really low to tolerate more levels of that. It's a tough method to do the way he's doing it.
Yeah, that sounds pretty like it sounds like people who really want to stretch themselves, like, but I mean, even in like an isometric hold, like you do a wall sit or something like that, you could I know in the way that a lot of bodyweight isometrics were prescribed by Jay Schrader, it's like 4 seconds in, 8 seconds out, but it's like, well, maybe you could take it to 12, maybe you could take it to further than that, and really challenge yourself.
If I'm not right, I thought in James's book that it was actually exhale breath holds that they were doing on the runs. I didn't think that he was just and I could be wrong because I haven't read it in a while. I didn't think that he was just like breathing little sips of air down the bottom. What he was actually doing was breath in, breath out, and he was holding his breath and then going for as long as he possibly could. And then when he recovered, he tried to take little sips of air in and out.
Oh, okay.
And that's an Oxygen Advantage method. It doesn't matter what the methodology is, but that comes from Patrick McKeown would do a lot on that as well, where it's breath in, breath out. Now run as far as you can. And then when you need to breathe, you inhale just a little sip of air and then exhale, and then a little sip of air and then an exhale.
Basically like you're in a pool, like a swimmer would do, basically,
Exactly. And what that will do is now you're training high CO2 levels, which is called hypercapnia, and you're training hypoxia, which is low oxygen levels. And you'll know if you're doing this in two ways. One, you could bring a blood oxygen saturation monitor, which will cost you $30. Okay. Or if you're getting dizzy, that's how I felt that when you know that your blood sats are dropping. When your blood sats are dropping, what that means is that you're now doing hypoxic training or simulated altitude training. So what's going on here is that you now have low oxygen in your blood, and your spleen and your cardiovascular system has to work extra hard to pump more oxygen into your system to help you keep going. So it's a version of altitude training, and you can get a third of the benefits of high altitude living by doing this style of training.
Nice. I love too that in addition to the potential for improved endurance, which obviously it sounds extremely effective. And I think that coach in Breath they were talking about who really like pushed those, like that CO2 tolerance in the land runners, apparently they had a lot of success at the next Olympics. I'd be curious the specifics of it, but I forgot. If nothing else, it'd be just fun too. For me, I don't know. It sounds weird for me that's fun on a run is trying to Yeah,
I'm after coming back from there was a gathering of, I'm a master instructor in the Advantage methodology. So I train people in it. And we had a gathering there in Patrick's home only about 3 weeks ago. And there was fascinating people. The All Blacks, the New Zealand rugby team, they've been doing it for a couple of years. The Australian rugby team, they've been doing it for a couple of teams. There's a couple of pro outfits in Australia doing it. I know there's a guy working with the San Francisco 49ers with some of their individual athletes. They're doing it. It's an element of training that's becoming more and more widely well known, and people are beginning to integrate it because they just see the value of it. It's incredible for land-based conditioning.
Yeah. It's been really exciting for me, even just being in my awareness. I think my morning practice primes me to want to think about that more when I'm going through, whatever training it is. Explosive, maybe a little bit less sometimes. Obviously, distance, I think about it a lot more. But I wanted to actually segue into the last question I had for you. So more of within the scope of typical gym training. So we're doing strength training, lifting heavier, more anaerobic. Two thoughts. One, we mentioned Paul Chek. I know he's talked about working in, like doing like more restorative breathing between heavier sets, or any sort of recovery breathing within the workout if I'm doing like explosive stuff, or even you could say sprints or anything that's like quick. And then second, just breathing and for strength in general, if there is anything there, like for just raw strength, like compression or pressurization. Maybe we'll start with the working in and then breathing and strength as the second part of that.
Yeah, I mean, the working in, what a lot of my workouts are now is, I'm 40 this month. And what a lot of my workouts now are is I still participate in judo competitively. I do a lot more coaching. I just do a lot of my activity for fun and for my own health, right? And what I find that my workouts are for is for solving creative problems in life. So good mental health, yeah, but actually for creativity. And most people know this, like you feel great after a workout and you think more clearly after a workout, which is fantastic. But you can also use a workout to be way more creative in your life. And that's the idea of that. That's the idea that I take away from Paul's working in methodology, which is in between your sets. First of all, if you calm your breathing, and it's just a matter of calming your breathing, you can do a million different ways of calming your breathing. You can do a box breath, which might be 4 seconds in, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. Okay. You could do 4-6 breathing for 2 minutes. Okay. Which is in for 4, out for 6 for 2 minutes. All of these methods slow your breath rate down, slow the volume down, help your heart rate to slow down, help lower blood pressure, help open up the frontal lobes in the thinking brain, and rebalance your whole system after a stressor. And for me, it's that's where you want to be when you're training. Is you want to push really hard when you're training in your set, but when you're outside of your set, you want to be recovering hard, for want of a better word. And the best way to recover hard is just latch your mind onto your breath, slow your breath down, calm it down. And then even if you want, Paul does artwork and does journaling around it. And it's amazing how you can make sense of your life and the problems in your life if you do a little bit of that work with it.
That's cool. I know Paul Cater, who I mentioned earlier, who did a lot of dance and rhythm stuff in his early GPP. He'll do it for his own personal workouts, do painting in between sets of deadlifts and stuff like that. So I didn't know Paul amazing. Did that as well.
Yeah. Paul did that, and I took that concept from him, and I would do it like in my gym, in my garage. I have a big blackboard and different chalk, and I don't know what I'm going to draw or write, and I'm not an artist by any means, but it's just like just put pen to paper and just start doodling, and eventually thoughts will come to your mind, and you'll try and draw pictures, and I leave it sit there even for the rest of my day, and then come in the next day, and sometimes I'm like and all of a sudden the solution to problems that I have in life just start appearing, for want of a better word. I don't know what the magic is behind it, but that's the idea of working in, which is getting creative and finding solutions to your life's problems.
Yeah.
And now there's another meaning to working out, right? Which is great. I'm
always thinking of a running list of things better than being on your phone in between lifting sets, because I see it all the time, especially young males in the gym, and it drives me nuts. I have a no phones policy for my athletes, but I'm just like, what are some better things that you could be doing right now? Let's think of all the things. And I especially too maintaining, like, I like thinking of the workout as one giant continuous flow state. Like, it really needs to be that. It needs to be, and people, like, it's almost the same thing as willingness to sit in a meditation. You know, like, can you sit with this workout as a singular entity for the given time? And if you can't, you're kind of taking away from a lot of things you could get out of it, you know, outside of just the mechanical stressors you're putting on your body. So that's another thing to add to the list. I love it.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Okay,
it's beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
Last bit, then you asked me about the creating pressure. I'll give you an example. I had a gentleman, Tyler. He was a strongman in Ontario in Canada. And he came to me originally for asthma and anxiety with his breathing. That's why he heard me on a podcast and said, okay, I'll chat away to Leo. And I think he put on, if I remember, I think he could have had a 300 kilo squat, which might have been about a 550 pound, maybe a bit more squat. And he put on about 40 kilos in 2 weeks of restoring his breathing mechanics. It was an incredible amount that he put on. It was like an extra 5% on like on a 1RM. It was an incredible amount that he put on. And this is in a trained athlete. And the reason why I could do that is first of all, your brain will always prioritize respiration over everything else. If you don't breathe, you die. It's as simple as that. So even if you are loading your body up with a maximal weight, if you don't have a big enough reserve in your respiration system, in your breathing system, well, then you won't be able to create the pressure that you need to lift that weight, and you'll end up injuring your back or your hip or your leg or some other body part because there'll be compensation mechanisms. So if you train your breath to be efficient, first of all, then you can apply it and use it at max strength. And yes, there's anatomical reasons for that and physiological reasons for that. So think of, let's just say you breathe through your mouth all day and you're in a maximal strength phase. You then go and you're training, let's say, a 5 rep max. That's a breath hold. So people will go, take a breath in, do their reps, down and up, say a squat, down and up, and then they finish and they unrack, and they breathe again. That's a 20-second breath hold with a load on your back. Believe it or not, that's a huge amount of pressure. If you're sensitive to carbon dioxide, you will lose your abdominal pressure because your brain will be sparking off because it's like, I'm in trouble here because I'm holding my breath so much, and you'll develop compensation patterns in your lifting technique. So just to go into the anatomy, because it's real simple, your diaphragm sits at the base of your ribs, and think of it like a jellyfish, right? So you've got the diaphragm is like that jelly part, and then the crura or the tendons of the diaphragm are like the tentacles of a jellyfish, and they attach onto your lumbar spine, onto your low back. Directly out of the same part of the low back come your hip flexors. Okay? So if your diaphragm doesn't move well, or the demands of your breathing are too high that the diaphragm is working, well, then it's going to start to pull on that low back, and it's going to start to pull on those hip flexors, and it's going to steal blood, steal energy, and steal power away from the lumbar spine and away from the hip flexors, and when you're in movement. So if you can restore your breathing mechanics and your breathing physiology, it will make all the rest of that work so much more efficiently.
Yeah, it makes sense. All the old school strongmen, like, you couldn't go into that material like in early 1900s without something about breathing, breath work, or even like putting chains around the ribs and chest to be able to expand the chest and break them. And I think it's like everything just funneled so much into only how much weight can you lift, and only in these 3 lifts, we lost some of that, like that out of the art of it too. Everything they, through their intuition, all came up with to kind of, it's more really specialized now. And if you're just going to pursue one singular, like the powerlifting discipline,
some of those old school strongmen used to blow up hot water bottles with their breathing, and their lungs and their breath was that strong. You had his name, it's going to kill me now that his name is gone. The father of fitness back in the 1950s, and he swam. He was really famous. Oh my God, I can't believe his name is gone. He was really famous for swimming. I think he swum a mile with a 70-ton boat behind them while handcuffed in San Francisco Bay.
Was that Lilane or was that?
Yes, Lilane, that's what it was. Yeah. Like there's those guys did crazy stuff, and that was back in the 50s and the 40s and the 30s and all the way back.
Crazy.
They were fit. They were strong guys.
Yeah, I think I some of those books are a little more like I bought the book called The Spiritual Journey of Joseph Greenstein, which was the Mighty Atom, like the shorter, smaller, like who could like bite through like nails and do all this crazy metal bending and like, but those books that cost a little bit more. They're like these older books that like it just kind of, I don't know. It's just going back into that history has been so powerful for me. So it's cool to hear you talk about that breath and like the strongman and like that full circle. Yeah, it's like we talk about, a lot of people have come on the show talking about the quickest way to close down your movement options and become very compressed is to specialize in powerlifting or to take powerlifting too far. And yeah, it's cool to hear your perspective of look, like there is, and honestly, even if you're just a powerlifter and just took on some of these breath practices and took your breath and that expansion and some of the other like bending and twisting and restoring movement options practices, you could be a lot more dynamic even in the powerlifting practice. So I just think it's a really, really cool area. And man, I'm so excited that I've become more tuned into this. It's been a really important part of what I've been doing. Just closing thoughts. So if you have any closing thoughts, Leo, and then where can people find you? Is there any, I think you mentioned you're writing a book or courses or anything that you want to talk about? Just let me know here or let everyone know.
Yeah, sure. My website is innatestrength.com. That's innate-strength.com. You'll find me on Instagram under the same handles is the easiest thing. I do breath training online where I coach people through those phases. It's all one-to-one, or you can actually just buy one of the programs off my website, and it's pretty cheap. Like it's $40 just for a 16-week program, an automated program that'll guide you through all those phases. That's where you'll find me, and I'm getting better on the Telegram to get information out there and kind of tell people what it's all about, and just educate them. That's what it's all about is education. And once you've restored the breathing, and maybe that will be my final thoughts, is once you've restored your breathing back to baseline, that's it. You don't need to worry about it again. You don't need to be thinking about it the whole time. You can then use specialized techniques for special purposes, but you don't need to be thinking and doing breath training for the rest of your life. You'll bring it in phases just as much as you'll bring in, strength and max strength and power and relative strength and strength endurance phases into your programs. You bring in phases of breath training, but it's not something that you have to do forever. Just restore your baselines and then get on and live a great life and enjoy yourself.
Awesome stuff, Leo. Well, hey, thank you so much again. It was wonderful having this conversation with you today.
Nice, Joel. Thanks a million.